The Spin-off Podcast Network.
Are you making the most of your KiwiSaver investment? Generate is an award-winning KiwiSaver provider with a track record of strong long-term performance. Making a smart decision now could add tens of thousands of dollars by the time you reach retirement. Book a no-obligation chat with a Generate KiwiSaver advisor today at generatekiwisaver.co.nz/get-advice. A copy of the product disclosure statement is available at generatekiwisaver.co.nz. The issuer of the scheme is Generate Investment Management Limited, and of course, past performance does not guarantee future returns.
I'm Toby Manhire, and this is Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour Government, a podcast in 6 parts.
Doesn't give my opponents much time to run up to an election, does it?
This nation is at risk.
What do you think you're up to now, you perverted little liar?
I could smell the uranium on it as you lean towards the
Most radical overhaul in the history of New Zealand's administration.
Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour Government, made with the support of New Zealand On Air. Listen now on The Spin-off or wherever you get your podcasts.
I haven't even read Madeline's lolly review. I feel really unprepared for today, but anyway, we'll go on.
Kia ora tātou, this is Gone by Lunchtime. My name is Toby Manhire. With me today, Annabelle Lee Mather.
Kia ora. Kia ora.
And Ben Thomas.
Kia ora.
You sound unsure of all our names today, including your own.
I have wrote the bulletin this morning, which involves getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning. So I'm no use to anyone. On top of which, I mistook the potency of some hot sauce that I put on my lunch that I brought to work. Oh. Why are you laughing, Alice? Did you see me struggling with that? She's like,
I've tried it though.
Yeah, it's hot, right?
It's horrible.
I thought it was going to be that normal stuff that we have. I didn't really pay attention. It's my own fault. And so I'm still kind of recovering from that. So I'm not responsible for any of what follows, listeners, except to say, Alice Webber-Dale, nice to have you. Thank you very much for producing us today. And thank you to Flick Electric, who make this hot sauce-fueled podcast possible. Check out the offers they have via any politics post on our website. Also, do I shill the members at this point too? Don't turn off the pod. It's going to get interesting in a second. Join up to Spin-off members and keep us in good quality journalism and hot sauce. How are you, Annabelle?
Very well.
You thought the podcast was tomorrow.
I did. I apologise. I arrived half an hour late to my own podcast.
It was worth the wait.
Feel rude.
It was your idea.
I know.
This is the only time you've ever wanted to do one.
I feel so embarrassed. And I totally dragged one of my friends at work today because she had missed 2 appointments in a row. And then I did this. It's very embarrassing. Sorry, guys.
Ben, you were here early, as ever.
I just like to spend time.
You're just doing a lot of punditing lately. You're right up there in terms of the pundit rankings.
The people need content, Toby.
And
also, there's been a lot of stuff happening.
There has been a lot of stuff happening, and
a lot of people out there in the discourse have been wrong about it. And so, unfortunately, I've had no option but to step in.
You can't sleep when there's wrongness to be put right.
You can't just stand idly by while Helen Clark is tweeting away in silence, with only the thin strains of Concert FM being heard from Peter Davis's room.
Helen, if you're listening on your flight from Dubai to Swaziland or wherever you are off to, hello from Gone by Lunchtime.
Can you word search your name on podcast audio
Ben's
files?
Mad that you blocked him on Twitter. Can you unblock Ben?
She hasn't blocked me. She blocked Annabelle.
Oh.
She blocked me because she's a toxic feminist. But
whoa.
But Ben, on the other hand,
God.
who drags her all day long and even writes whole columns about her, he doesn't get blocked. Strange.
Just membership benefits of the patriarchy. Helen Clark, I'm not going to block you.
Love to have you on the pod, Helen Clark. If you come, love your work. We'll maybe get to you a little bit more later. But
come on the pod, Helen, you coward.
The Helen Clark is not a coward. She's speaking forthrightly on a number of issues, mostly Concert FM. The main issue of the day is donations and the Serious Fraud Office and donations. It feels as though, Annabelle Lee Mather, it feels as though donations could completely swallow up election year, and all we'll be talking about is donations.
It's a very donatey time in the news cycle, isn't it? I have thought a lot this week about when Winston Peters announced that he was going to go with Jacinda, and how there was like a kind of ripple of optimism around the country that perhaps the old warhorse had reached his prime and was going to ascend to the rank of an elder statesman of the New Zealand Parliament, and we were going to see him like drape his korowai over this young, optimistic Prime Minister who was, what was it, bursting with unrelenting enthusiasm or whatever, relentlessly,
positivity.
all of that,
Yes.
and that there was going to be this change in politics, you know, which seemed very exciting and delicious in the moment. But then, of course, you know, we remember that he does have a habit of imploding with his coalition partners. But this time it was like, no, it's going to be different. Could be different. He's older now. He's growing. But here we are. And it seems like far from becoming an elder statesman, he's like ranting and raving on Facebook and playing Radio Gaga at the press stand-up. It's just the most
He's like one of these old...
undignified behaviour from our Deputy Prime Minister, and the PM seems cool with it. So
he played Radio Gaga on his phone to the media pack in Parliament yesterday being Tuesday, today's Wednesday, I think, as a way of kind of diverting. That's a favourite tactic of his, and he will also be, for those of you who are disappointed by recent cancellations, he will be playing the complete works of Elton John on his phone at Mount Smart Stadium tonight and tomorrow night. But he also has been doing... Well, let's backtrack a little bit.
do you think he'll do a TikTok video, like with Radio Gaga and maybe the no sign, and it'll be just like a big
do one of the
mashup
dances
of all his...
Yeah, with Bo. Like, it started so well with all the Bo content that was produced by the spinoff.co.nz, Bo being his chocolate Labrador. Did you see that?
No.
A heckin' good
great
doggo.
content. It could only go down from there. Let's just quickly remind those of you who haven't been paying close attention that the reason we talk about Winston Peters is because he's been on the defensive, and of course the defensive means the aggressive. He's been attacking the media, particularly after a series of stories have appeared on RNZ and on Stuff by Gowan Espiner and Matt Shand, respectively, relating to
Newton.
the New Zealand, and Kate Newton, quite right, on RNZ, relating to, she didn't have she wasn't photographed as Espiner and Shand were, and those photos then found their way to the BFD website, which is basically Whale Oil 2.0. The photos were of the journalist meeting with the former president of the New Zealand First Party, Gray. What's his name?
Lester
Gray. What am I doing? I'm garbling.
Sounds like a baddie in a Superman movie.
So there's two things that
Wait.
I think there's two things that Winston Peters is really in the gun for. So this is the first one, which is the revival of dirty politics.
Man.
Sorry,
It's all right. You go.
It's a slow segue, but yeah. I'm joking.
It was bad. Look, I
was
had a lot of hot sauce.
You woke up very early. Sorry, Ben. We digress.
but I mean, so this is probably the less serious part, sort of scandal that Winston Peters is facing right now.
Hang on, which is the least serious part?
This is the photos.
The photos is the least serious part.
Yeah. So what happened is, and this is the interesting thing, if Winston
Don't know
Peters
if I
has,
entirely agree, but yeah.
as suggested, been working with the successor to the Whale Oil blog to do dirty politics by the playbook described in the book Dirty Politics by Nikki Hager, to attack these journalists, then first of all, I think that's it's a weird strategic mistake because who the fuck reads the BFD? I mean, the photos were on the website for about a week before Peter Williams on Magic Talk Radio asked Winston Peters about it. Then, because who the fuck listens to Magic Talk, it was about another 3 days before that made it to the mainstream media.
I'm so excited for Peter Williams. Like, you go, you little newsbreaker, all the way over on Magic.
A really quick parenthesis on that, which I think was particularly funny, given Magic Talk, every tiny little fucking diatribe or controversy that happens between its guest and some rando from some organisation gets turned into a big breaking story on News Hub because they're just, working the content machine. Hey, Alice. But Alice used to work there. She's doing something else. She doesn't know what I'm talking about.
That's right. Anything that Sean Plunkett wants to do will get 2 weeks of hype on his Twitter account.
Actually, there's a real story emerges on them. Another radio station excavates it from mid-morning.
And it was a genuine scoop. Peter Williams asked about these covert photos, that certainly looked like they were taken without the knowledge of Matt Shand, Guy Nespiner and Lester Gray and Tauranga, and said, what was the deal with these photos on this right-wing attack blog? And Winston Peters said, we took the photos. And Peter Williams said, why? And he said, to show the media that, we will do to them what they do to everyone else. So a clear element of score settling, a clear admission. I think we all know how, the first person plural works as a pronoun. And then this caused, a pretty, a bit of a media maelstrom. Then later in the day, Winston Peters tweeted that actually it was nothing to do with him or the party. Jacinda Ardern, the Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, described that as a clarification of his original comments rather than a complete reversal and different story entirely. Since then, the Prime Minister, when she's been asked about it and whether she approves of those tactics and whether she has talked to the Prime Minister, the Deputy Prime Minister, Winston Peters, about it, has said that he's made public statements about it, clarifying what happened, and that she and has given every indication that she will not talk to him about it. She will duck out of the room. She will jump into a taxi. She'll, hire a Lime scooter and zip across the parliamentary courtyard rather than be in a position where she has to discuss this with her Deputy Prime Minister, who she is responsible, or who is responsible to the Prime Minister for his conduct, both in his ministerial portfolios as a politician and in his personal conduct under the Cabinet Manual, which all ministers sign up to.
I mean, the counterpoint to that is that this is a matter relating to the New Zealand First Party and the New Zealand Foundation, which, by the way, has now triggered a formal investigation by the Serious Fraud Office we learned yesterday. But it is still unequivocally a party matter. And Ardern's position, which I have some sympathy with, is that she can't be expected to police every activity of someone, which is, we often make jokes about people wearing hats and sometimes it's silly, but I don't think there can be any ambiguity about Winston Peters in terms of those photos, in terms of the role of the foundation, in terms of the SFO investigation, is a party leader rather than a Deputy Prime Minister. Isn't that fair?
Yeah, that's entirely fair, but the Cabinet Manual is very explicit. Interestingly enough, the Prime Minister on Radio New Zealand told Susie Ferguson the Cabinet Manual is not explicit on these issues. The Cabinet Manual is incredibly explicit on these issues. It says that personal conduct of ministers, they are accountable to the Prime Minister for that, and they have to uphold the highest ethical standards when they're doing that. Now, the Prime Minister has said that she's not willing to investigate this, but, if she wants to draw a distinction between things he does in his role as party leader or things he does as a keen fisherman up in Whananaki or things he does as a keen bettor on the old GGs at the horse track and work he does as a minister, well, that's fine, but she's still got to apply some kind of standard, i.e. the highest ethical standards, to that behaviour. Donald Trump used to say, I could stand on Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and I wouldn't lose any votes. And Jacinda Ardern seems to be saying that Winston Peters could stand on Lambton Quay, shoot somebody, and not be summoned in for a please explain by the Prime Minister unless he shot a diplomat on the way to some, foreign affairs drinks, because that's in his portfolio. Now, that's obviously ludicrous.
It's clearly ludicrous, and of course there's got to be some point at which the behaviour affects a change, and I mean, implicit in that is that this is not of the severity. She has said two things. One, we want natural justice to play out insofar as the SFO investigation is concerned, which at very least buys some time. She's also said, Annabelle, insofar as the moral dimension is concerned, that she doesn't approve of these blogs or these sorts of websites, in a reference to Wero. Do you think she could have done more? I mean, she could obviously stand Winston Peters down, but do you think you would have liked to see at least a bit more of a kind of stake in the ground morally? Like, she could just say, I'm concerned. I don't approve of these things.
I would have thought that she could come out and make a strong statement without completely imploding the coalition. I would have thought that wouldn't. I mean, we have New Zealand First regularly come out and criticise policies or rule things in or out. Ihu Mata was a recent example. So I would have thought that she would have had the political capital to have been able to say that it's really unbecoming behaviour, and I would have thought at the very least, given that it's been referred to the Serious Fraud Office, which is, a significant organisation. It's not like, some internal review, that there would be grounds for standing him down until that's come out. I just want to go back to the issue with Guyon and Matt Shand. As a journalist, I have seen firsthand how poorly whistleblowers get treated. Now, I'm not saying that Lester is necessarily in that position, but I've seen and I've done stories where people have come out and called out government departments and whatnot for serious misconduct, and there's been cases that have gone to the Serious Fraud Office and have been prosecuted, and those whistleblowers have been treated so poorly. They've lost jobs, they've lost income, they've had their reputations tarnished, and we do very little to support them. So that there is a Deputy Prime Minister out there who is a part of photographing journalists as they go about their business, that should be really concerning for all of us in the media, and for anyone who believes in the freedom of the media and the role the media plays in, supporting our democracy. So I think that that's also another issue that she should have come out much more strongly on.
Yeah, I've been meaning to look up again Winston Peters' speech, which he delivered at the Beehive Theaterette towards the end of last year, when he presented himself as the knight in shining armour saving New Zealand media, because it's so important to have those independent voices. Kind of an interesting compare and contrast. Ben?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I did a quick Google search, or Hansard search.
Just the kind of research you get at Gone by Lunchtime.
The international community of scholars, and just looked for a few of the things that members of the Labour Party and the Greens have described as dirty politics since the release of Nikki Haga's 2014 book of the same name. They described the National Party holding a public meeting to discuss conservation issues in the South Island as dirty politics. I think they described a series of ads that the National Party did as dirty politics. And yet when we have the Deputy Prime Minister seemingly collaborating with the protagonists of the book Dirty Politics by Nikki Haga to run a campaign against journalists laundered through an attack blog using the exact blueprint described in the book Dirty Politics. Nobody seems to be quite sure whether that would be dirty politics or not.
Winston Peters denies the account you just described.
That's right. His
stress.
denial is one of the 2 accounts he's given.
Presume as far
Maybe
as
if he does another Facebook Live, we'll get a decider account that will
if we recall in 2008, a kind of eerily similar series of events played out involving Winston Peters and the Prime Minister, who's the leader of the Labour Party. I think Peters was Foreign Minister rather than Deputy Prime Minister, but Helen Clark at the time, hi Helen, Helen Clark at the time had a conversation with Winston Peters, after which he determined to stand down, and he has a letter in his boot which he carries around with him to prove this. But whatever went on in that conversation, we don't know. But Jacinda Ardern seems unwilling to have that conversation with him. So my question to you, O Scholar Ben Thomas, O Hansard Seer, what is the difference between 2008 and 2020?
The difference is that Jacinda Ardern is no Helen Clark. She is, unfortunately, because I think it's pretty well known, I like the Prime Minister, most people in New Zealand like the Prime Minister, she is being a supine weakling on this. She is too afraid to even raise these matters with her Deputy Prime Minister. So that's not just the SFO investigation into donations around the New Zealand First Foundation, which there are a lot of questions raised by the Deputy Prime Minister himself and how he's discussed his relationship with the foundation, which you would after the electoral, because remember the earliest development in this story this year was that the Electoral Commission put out a statement saying that it had come to the conclusion, or it had determined, that donations made to the mysterious New Zealand First Foundation, which Winston Peters had always said nothing to do with, well, they're completely set up independently from the party and with no, totally operated at arm's length, should have been declared as donations to New Zealand First, and that they were not properly transmitted to the party. And then they referred that to the police because they said, we don't have the investigatory powers to establish whether an offence has been committed, just that this was done wrong under the law. And then the police transferred that onto the Serious Fraud Office, who yesterday announced that they would be commencing a formal investigation. Now, there are a lot of questions raised by that. This was the point when the SFO actually declared an investigation, when Helen Clark agreed with Winston Peters to accept his offer, his gracious offer to stand down. And I had expected that this might be the point at which Jacinda Ardern might decide that she wanted to cauterise some of the damage that New Zealand First sleaze is doing to the Labour governments and her own brand of sort of kindness and positivity and integrity. She's chosen not to do that, and the only explanation can be that she is afraid of that he will withdraw support for the government and that there will have to be an early election.
And there's good reason not to want an early election, because there is a lot of money to be dealt out in the budget. There are a whole lot of kind of parts of wheels of government that have been choreographed to land by August, September, right?
Yeah, as you pointed out earlier, we've still got these referenda that need to be drafted properly.
The cannabis, if there was a snap election, certainly the cannabis referendum, it's hard to see how that could go ahead. I don't know. I'm not certain, possibly the assisted dying. It would just also on top of all that, you get punished when you go to. So even though you're going to argue, well, New Zealand First would be punished, who knows?
Well, and also I think Labour will be much less eager to do that right now, because we've now seen a couple of Colmar Brunton polls in succession, which would show National being able to form a government. And the other thing is, you've got to remember, all the people in the Beehive are humans, so that all of the staffers and advisors around Ardern will all be thinking, shit, I don't want to lose my $120,000 a year job. I don't. Let's just wait and see. And we might think that's trivial in terms of what's at stake in the country, but people are only human.
It just looks
it
like a
seems
nuclear
like
option.
Simon's had a bit of fairy dust sprinkled onto me with him announcing that he wouldn't go with Winston, and
That
then
was
like
very
a
well
week
timed.
later, Winston seems to.
But I'm
implode again.
I'm glad you mentioned Simon Bridges, who we haven't got to yet, because I imagine there have been a few people who will have been screaming at their podcast machines while we've been talking about New Zealand First, that what about national? And indeed, I would posit that another part of the reason that Jacinda Ardern perhaps feels slightly less pressure to do something drastic in relation to Winston Peters is because the opposition, the biggest party in New Zealand, is itself embroiled in a donation scandal, is itself, in fact, further down that path, is itself, in fact, donations to it are the subject of 4 criminal charges, 4 individuals facing criminal charges, rather, over donations to the National Party. We should stress Simon Bridges is not one of those, neither is anyone in the National Party, we're assured, but they're criminal charges. This is really serious. 3 of them applied in the District Court yesterday to have their name suppression lifted. It's
Why would you
serious
apply to have
business.
your name suppression lifted? I don't understand.
Well, we don't know, but it might be so that they felt that they could have a clearer run at defending themselves.
Okay.
It might be it might be because they want it might be that the 4th individual is different to the other 3, and they want to separate themselves from the 4th.
Because there were 3 of them are on joint charges relating to the donations, and
Yes.
one of them is on a charge of.
Also on a charge.
Is also it faces an additional charge of trying to mislead the SFO.
The SFO.
So
okay.
it could be. We don't know that the 3 who have tried to get the name suppression lifted are the 3 who are not facing that charge, but it could be that they're trying to.
It wouldn't be
Distance
wild to
themselves
speculate
from
that
number
it,
4.
that it might be right. But
Okay.
but this is really serious too. And of course Simon Bridges can say, as he did on the radio this morning, that he doesn't know about this second charge of $100,000 and he can only speculate. And there is an audio recording which was released by someone by the name of Jamie Lee Ross last year, which began a lot of all this, which showed that Simon Bridges did not encourage anyone to break the law. But the idea that somehow the National Party are absolutely loving it and sweet and in the clear is, I don't think, right.
No, I mean, that will swirl around them, and I think that the Prime Minister was probably counting on that a bit in terms of the narrative that they were trying to set early in this year, in terms of a positive campaign with, based on the facts, and shooing away negativity, and hoping for a contrast between, bright shining beacon of the social democratic Western world, Jacinda Ardern, and, grumpy old Simon Bridges always banging on about gangs and cutting poor people's pay or something. And unfortunately, that gambit is looking much less secure as time goes on because of the extent to which the Prime Minister has yoked herself to Winston Peters and the scandals surrounding him. National. What's the worst case scenario from National out of this? That they're at least seen as only as bad as the party propping up Jacinda Ardern and the Labour government.
There is.
They've got way more wriggle room, though, don't they? Because they're not having to hold together a coalition with a partner under pressure. 2, they're not the government. 3, none of their party or their people have been charged. So it's a lot easier for them to navigate their way through the shitstorm of it, I would think.
For now.
Well,
yeah, who knows what is yet to
who
come.
knows what will come.
Hi, Helen. Helen Clark has kind of featured a bit in the
First time
news
caller, long time listener, Helen Clark.
recently.
Long time letters to the editor, crank writer.
The 2008 Helen Clark has inadvertently caused Jacinda Ardern a little bit of problem. But the 2020 edition of Helen Clark, jet setter, global diplomat, insofar as she became a very vocal, strident activist on the part of the besieged Concert FM, and you both got into rows with Helen Clark about this. Why can't Helen Clark stand up for a cultural taonga like the like concert radio?
First of all, I need to declare a conflict of interest, which is that the chair of RNZ is actually my flatmate. And my husband and the father of some of my children. So just going to put all my cards out on the table right now. No, I saw that Helen started tweeting about our RNZ concert, and she described the proposal to redeploy the FM frequency that it's currently on to be used for a youth station. She started describing it as marginalisation, which I have to say, as a Māori, I found it a bit on the nose, given that she confiscated the foreshore and seabed, which is both a cultural and a resource taonga, I guess, for many Māori. And also she was the Minister of Culture and Heritage, and during her time, Te Matatini, which is of course the National Kapahaka Organisation, is completely underfunded by comparison to the Royal New Zealand Ballet and the New Zealand Symphony Orchestra. So I shared with her a link to a story we did when I was at Native Affairs about the inequity in the funding of the arts, that shows that in terms of reach, participation, audience, ratings, all of those things, Te Matatini is grossly underfunded by comparison. So, and then she blocked me.
I mean, she's not here to defend herself against this ruthless attack from my two podmates, but she would say that she might say that it's not a zero-sum game. We can have all these. We should have a deeper, richer, better culture. But what is unequivocal, it seems to me, is that this was an incredible. This was a best in class example. Never have I seen a better example of a lobbying effort being swift and effective, including Grant Robertson sort of almost grovelingly on Twitter coming back to
she was like,
Helen Clark,
what are you going to do about
this? We're going to look into it.
No, what was he started off with? We will, Helen. It was this guy is the number.
You can't read tone on Twitter, I suppose, but all the same, it was quite to behold, right?
It was pretty demeaning from her former Deputy Chief of Staff, Grant Robertson. Because one thing about this government is that, we sort of think, Helen Clark's a former Prime Minister, she's a private citizen, she's a concert music enthusiast, she should be allowed to say whatever she likes. And, that's totally fair, but you shouldn't ever discount the idea that, when Auntie Helen speaks, this is not just some private citizen musing out loud. She was the employer of Jacinda Ardern, the Prime Minister, Grant Robertson, the Finance Minister, Chris Hipkins, the Leader of the House, when they worked in her beehive office. She has an enormous amount of sway and influence over these people. And what I thought was interesting about it, and wrote at length in the Sunday Star Times about, was that in the same week that her eponymously named think tank Helen Clark Foundation released an extraordinarily tepid and uninspired document on housing policy, promoting policies that this government had ruled out a year ago.
Which she's keen to point out was not her work. It's merely a foundation that takes her name.
Oh, sure. But on the, during that week, all of her efforts were devoted to belittling Chris Farfoy on Twitter, atting Grant Robertson, and fulminating about any diminution of the kind of privileged cultural space that boomers of her generation enjoy.
The good news is that it all worked out well, and it looks like we're going to magically get both now. We'll have concert, and we'll have the youth media, the youth radio, the youth music, the What's a Doodle thing.
But wait, there's more. Oh. No, it's not finished actually. It's not a happy ending, because in the meantime, while this issue was resolved in a week with the huge political will behind it, I think about people like Huirangi Waikereputu and those kaumātua that had to go all the way to the Privy Council so that Māori could have get access to the airwaves, and the underfunding of Māori radio for decades and decades and decades, who literally run stations on the memory of the smell of an oily rag, who are actually responsible for revitalising Te Reo Māori and the specific dialects of the areas that they broadcast in, as well as creating programming for youth, for kaumātua, for giving people a gateway into the Māori broadcasting industry. Are we going to see like a massive funding increase for those guys as well? Can Helen tweet out
500k?
Nanaya and others?
Webberdale wrote a good piece about that on the spin-off.
She did. Thank you, girlfriend.
Which you can read. Meanwhile, we're out of time on this youth media brand. Gone by lunchtime. Talk soon. Wait, one postscript from Annabelle Lee Mather.
I just really want to say thank you to the Free Speech Coalition, in particular, like Don Brash and Chris Trotter and others, for their outspoken support of Renee Maihi and her case against Bob Jones. Kia ora koutou.
Do you find it hard staying optimistic with all the financial news in the media? I'm Bernard Hickey, and on my podcast, When the Facts Change, I'm here to help you navigate the ever-changing landscape of economics in Aotearoa. So join the conversation every Friday on When the Facts Change, brought to you by the Spin-Off Podcast Network in partnership with KiwiBit.
Are you curious about how business can be better? I'm Simon Pound, and I host Business is Boring, a podcast where I kōrero with some of the most interesting people in entrepreneurship, commerce, and making things happen. Tune in to Business is Boring every Tuesday, brought to you by the Spin-Off Podcast Network in partnership with Spark Business Lab. The Spin-Off Podcast Network.